Hello and welcome to Cannamantv. My name is Connor MacLeod, and in this exclusive interview I speak to the leader of Clear UK, Peter Reynolds. Peter has been an instrumental figure in the UK's cannabis scene for over 2 decades, campaigning for both medicinal and recreational cannabis and playing a key role in the UK's CBD industry. Peter and I discuss the current state of the UK's cannabis industry, clinical trials, CBD, recreational cannabis and the UK's future regarding medicinal cannabis. Make sure and stick around until the end so you don't miss out on the end of episode cartoon. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Thanks for chatting with me, Peter. This is great.
That's my pleasure.
We'll just start off by addressing the elephant in the room, cannabis and the coronavirus.
Right.
There's been plenty of articles online saying that cannabis suppresses your immune system, then same amount saying that it boosts it. I mean, what are your comments on cannabis and the coronavirus?
Oh, cannabis definitely suppresses your immune system. Definitely, no doubt about that. I mean, that's the reason that cannabis is an anti-inflammatory, because it suppresses the immune response. I mean, it's not, as with so many things in medicine and so many things in cannabis, there's no absolute answer. But it's foolish to claim that cannabis in any way could treat the coronavirus, potentially dangerous, because it does lower your immune system, and therefore it could lower your resistance to infection. On the other hand, you can argue that cannabis improves your health, helps you maintain homeostasis in all sorts of other ways. So you could say that's supporting your health and could make you stronger. So it's impossible to say. And the reality of it is that it will be entirely down to the individual and down to the particular circumstances. So it's a very dangerous area to get into. In terms of what we've said online, we've said warning, just be very careful of a lot of the things that people are saying. There are obvious things, like first of all, we shouldn't be socializing with other people. And if you are, you certainly shouldn't be passing joints back and forth.
Yeah, no.
But I don't know, passing joints back and forth is something that seemed to go out of fashion quite a while ago now, because when I first started smoking weed, everybody passed their joints.
Yeah.
But in the last 10, 15 years, people tend to keep their own joints anyway, in my experience. So, yeah.
No, I've experienced the same. It's funny that my Cannaman comic, I use the joint often as one of the things in it. I'm thinking to myself, is that going to be something I'm going to have to change for a vaporizer soon? You never know.
Well, that's right, yeah. I mean, I consume more. I still smoke joints because I enjoy it. But I mean, most of the time I consume via my vaporizer. Vaporizing is, I suppose it's never a good idea to inhale anything into your lungs except air. But in terms of the damage that vaporizing does, it's such an infinitesimal fraction of what it is compared to smoking. It's got to be the preferred route, and it's a legitimate medical route. So even if you're a medicinal user, most of the prescriptions that have now been written for cannabis for adults in the UK, they're all private as far as we know, but they're all for bud to be vaporized.
Right. Just be talking about medical cannabis in particular as well. That'd be quite a good thing to start with. It's obviously legalised, for over a year now, and it seems to be an epic failure to getting towards the patients. So I mean, what do you think the main cause for this is? Is this an undereducation through people that are administering it? Is it are they nervous about being accountable for the first for applying the first few medicines, or is it just is it systematic and they're just not ready for it?
I think it's all of those things. I mean, I think that's right. But I mean, I think what I would say is, obviously there's a great deal of frustration, and protests about the fact that if you can afford to go private, you can get it, and that's true. And I agree. That feels very unjust, but it was always thus. I mean, any new. I mean, in a sense, this is not new. This is something very, very old that has been brought back in. But any new development in medicine is always available first in the private sector. You will remember there's been various, news issues over the last few years, particularly children. I remember there was a child who desperately needed proton beam radiation therapy, and there was nowhere available. The NHS wasn't doing it. And the only way he could get it, they had to raise £250,000 to send him to Czechoslovakia or something. But now the NHS has a proton beam radiation therapy, and that's the way it always works. And the reason it works like that is because it's public money, and because it's public money, there is a higher standard of a higher test applied to it as to whether or not it should be being spent in this way. And I mean that's right, because the same people who are arguing that it should be available on the NHS would also be the same people who would argue you can't spend public money on that because it's not proven.
Yeah.
And that's where it is. So I mean, whilst I have clearly enormous sympathy with people who need cannabis as medicine, and I know enough about it over many years work and research to know that it does work for many people. The standard of proof that or the standard of evidence that the NHS requires is high. I mean that's complicated by the fact that also you do have a medical establishment that is corrupt. I make no bones about it. Professor Finbar O'Callaghan, who is the director of the British Paediatric Neurology Association, and has been the main obstacle to allowing the NHS to prescribe cannabis containing a very small proportion of THC for epileptic children. He makes his living out of running clinical trials. So it's not surprising that the man is refusing to approve something that hasn't been through clinical trials. And I mean, I'm not, that is a form of corruption. I'm not saying the guy is completely without any ethics at all. He probably justifies it to himself. But the argument that they put forward that THC is potentially dangerous, THC in a ratio of 20 to 1, 20 CBD to 1 part of THC, the idea that is dangerous to children is nonsense. There's no evidence to support that at all. The evidence he's referring to is evidence about sustained recreational use by smoking in adolescence. It's a completely different thing. So the reasons are very complicated. To a certain extent, they're justified, but I mean, they're inevitable. And we made amazing progress. When I first became leader of Clear 10 years ago now, the idea, there was no possibility whatsoever of cannabis being recognised as a medicine. There were maybe 1, 2, perhaps 3 MPs out of 650 who were supportive. So we've made enormous progress. And 2 to 3 years from now, a lot of these problems will have gone.
How much of an impact do you think the CBD industry has had on pushing forward legitimate recreational and medical use?
Huge. It's done an awful lot to destigmatise cannabis, an awful lot. And I think it started because there was more and more evidence. This is why I got into the politics of it, because there was more and more evidence has emerged about the genuine value of cannabis as medicine. More and more people wanted to access that, without breaking the law. And so when CBD first began to emerge in about 2012 was the very beginnings of it. That's what made it take off. And I think as more and more people experience benefit from it, it was a genuinely organic word of mouth thing. And it has done an awful lot to destigmatize cannabis. I mean, we know now that, even in terms of recreational or adult use, there's a majority of the population in favour of reform in that direction. It will happen soon.
Going back to the medical side, obviously I think it's cannabis medical clinics, is that correct? What role the private clinics, what role do you think they'll play when cannabis is increased medically in the future? I mean, will they just be still a private enterprise, or will they integrate with NHS in some way? Or, I mean, what?
No, I think there'll still be private clinics, just the same as you can go to a private clinic for anything else now. If you've got the money and you want to, sit in a plush chair as opposed to perch on a rickety old NHS stool, then some people will want to go privately. But I have no doubt that in, I don't know how long, but in 2 or 3 years' time, I expect we'll see GPs prescribing rather than consultants, which is a much more, that's one of the other problems, I think. I mean, in their caution, the government have only allowed consultants to prescribe. But by their nature, consultants are focused specifically on the disease or the area of the body in which they specialize. And so they're much more disease orientated rather than person or patient orientated. Whereas GPs, by definition, have to take a more holistic approach. Let's look at the whole of the person, the whole of the patient's life and issues. And so, in fact, GPs are better suited to prescribing a medicine like cannabis, and I'm sure they will be soon.
Last month, I think the British Medical Journal published a paper that described that we've laid down quite a good format for the emerging cannabis market in the UK. And you've got things like the academic side, you've got medicals, you've got the Food Standards Agency as well. I mean, is this an accumulation that's kind of going unseen? This network and play kind of thing, is this going to emerge fruitful in the near future, or is this?
Well, I mean, it's all it's all a mess at the moment. I mean, you've got regulators like the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, and the MHRA, the Medicine and Healthcare Agency, who are, and the Home Office, who are the three regulators relevant to this, who don't really know what they're doing. That they, again, to be fair to them, that they come from a background where 5 minutes ago, in relative terms, cannabis was illegal, had no medical value, and was this extremely dangerous substance that drove people insane. So to expect them to expect these massive bureaucracies to suddenly turn around and be able to regulate this substances market sensibly is unrealistic. But I mean, there are great problems. I mean, I don't know whether you're referring to the FSA and the CBD market.
Yeah.
I mean, you are. I mean that is a complete nightmare. It's I mean, where to start with it? I mean, the CBD market does need better regulation. As I said, the CBD market first started in about 2012. I was closely involved with it from the very beginning, largely because I recognised that it would do exactly what it has done, and it would help to destigmatise cannabis, and it would help to drive the market forward and move us towards legalization. And there's been a lot of cowboys around, what has happened is the two trade associations, the CTA, the Cannabis Trade Association, and Cannapro, both of which I've been involved in, have over a period of about 3 or 4 years have done a great job on self-regulation. If you buy from a CTA member or if you buy from a Cannapro member, you will be getting what you pay for. It will be as described on the tin. It will be safe. It will be legitimate. But what's happened is this market has gone from nothing to they reckon as much as £1 billion within very 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 short space of time. And suddenly the regulators have got interested, and suddenly big business has got interested. Because the CBD market is now worth more than the whole of the vitamin C and the vitamin B market put together.
Yeah.
So all those companies that were selling supplements in that area realize they've missed out on this. And so what's happened is a new organization has come along, funded by big business. You know who I'm talking about, the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis, the Association for the Cannabinoid Industry, who have decided they want to seize control of the market, over-regulate it to the point where only large companies can afford to progress with it. And so they've taken advantage of this EU novel foods thing, which is total nonsense. I mean, believe me, it is complete and utter rubbish. It's a bureaucrat's dream.
Is this still relevant considering what's just happened recently with Brexit and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, it is because when we left the EU, although we're in transition at the moment, nevertheless, when we left the EU, we automatically carried over all EU legislation into UK legislation. Right. So we have carried that over, and of course you've got to remember that the EU. I'm no fan of bureaucracies, and the FSA, got a lot of its power from the EU. Because anything it wanted to implement in the UK, that it would have the backing of the EFSA and of the European Commission. and so it's very keen to maintain its power base. And now these two new organisations, backed by multimillionaires, backed by David Cameron's ex-fixer, this guy Steve Moore, are pulling all the levers of power, are backing what the FSA is saying, despite the fact that it is complete. The idea that cannabis or cannabis extracts are novel is complete tosh. I mean, it's complete and utter tosh. And there's been evidence presented to the EU and to the FSA to show it, but they're just not interested. They're just not listening at all. So the CMC and the ACI are trying to leverage their way into the market, which a lot of small businesses have built. A lot of people who I know personally who literally started working out of their car boot sale, right out of their garage, and have now built, still small businesses, but much more substantial than when they started, and worked very, very hard for that. They are the CMC are trying to steal it, basically. That's the way I see it. I think it's very clear.
Yeah. So, what direction do you see this taking? Is this an effortless battle for them? Is this essentially the small businessman has no way to go?
Well, I think the FSA shot itself in the foot. I think the CMC and the ACI will prove to have shot themselves in the foot, because the whole idea that CBD products are a novel food is nonsense. It is absolute nonsense, as I've just explained. And the idea that you can regulate it through the novel foods regulations just doesn't make any sense. I agree that it needs better regulation. I do. I agree it needs better. There are some cowboys. There are people making medicinal claims which they shouldn't be making. But the trouble is the regulator isn't doing anything about that. The MHRA is responsible for enforcing what's called the Human Medicines Regulations, which make it a criminal offence to claim that a product can treat a medical condition if it hasn't got a license. There are CBD companies and CBD retailers all over the country claiming it cures anxiety, cures depression, treats cancer, arthritis, etc., etc., etc. And in theory, each time someone makes that sort of claim on an unlicensed product, in theory, they can face up to 2 years in jail. But there's almost nothing being done about enforcement. And so all the people who are members of the CTA and members of Cannapro, who've worked very hard to build up their business and are compliant, are very careful not to make medicinal claims, they suffer because the regulators are failing to enforce the existing regulations. So it's a mess, it is a mess, but I suppose it's like all new industries and all new markets. It will sort itself out in the end. The problem is that the FSA literally doesn't know what it's talking about. And the way that it has defined what CBD is demonstrates it doesn't know what it's talking about. Because if you look at its correspondence and the phraseology it uses, what it's talking about is CBD isolate. That is pure CBD. And of course, none of the products on the market are CBD isolate. Not what some, there are a few that are, but the vast majority are whole plant extracts. So they're extracted using a sophisticated process, CO2 extraction, but the process makes no difference to the constitution of the product, and it doesn't make any difference whether you extract it by soaking it in alcohol, making porridge out of it, making soup out of it, or whether you do it in this sophisticated CO2 extraction equipment. It still represents the same constituents as are in the plant from which it's derived. So it's not novel. The CMC came out with this study about a year ago now, which has just been published in the Cannabinoid and Cannabinoid Research, is it called, the journal. They came out with this study, and I put study in inverted commas, where it showed that at least half the CBD products on the market didn't contain the level of CBD they claimed, and often contained illegal levels of THC. This is just a scam. That's all it is. Because what they did was, there are rogue products out there. Of course, there are rogue products out there. We all know that. But as I said a minute ago, if you go to a CTA member or a Cannapro member who represent the real core of the industry, then you will get what you're paying for. And what the CMC did was select products deliberately to fail the test. in order that they could then say on the back of their study, but all our members are okay. So these newcomers have come into the market, got the big companies to fund them with huge membership fees, £15,000 upwards.
Jesus.
It's ridiculous. And they've done this so-called study to say everybody else's products are rubbish and ours are fine. It's all a scam.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that sounds very much like the Wild West, to be perfectly honest, in regards to business. Yeah. So, I mean, CBD, like you said a minute ago, it's relatively new. Would you say that it's ridiculous to say that in the next 5 years we're maybe looking at recreational cannabis in the UK?
No, not at all. I think back to your first question. I do think a lot of people are saying this, and I do think it's probably true that coronavirus will hasten the move towards legalization even further. But I mean, I also believe that I get a lot of flack for this belief, but I also believe that Boris Johnson is a force for legalization. He's a social liberal. He has two people in his senior team, Blair Gibbs and the chap who's now the MP for Devizes, I've forgotten his name now, who've both worked on cannabis reform. They're in Boris Johnson's top team of advisors. Legalizing cannabis is a conservative policy. It's about free markets. It's about free enterprise. It's not a Labour policy, never has been. Again, if you look at the history of this, if you look at the history of all drugs policy, there's no party that's been worse at it in this country than Labour. If you look at the Alan Johnsons, the Jackie Smiths, the Gordon Browns, the Jack Straws, going back over 20, 30 years of politics now, they've been the most fearsome drug warriors, the most hardline prohibitionists. And yet people don't realise this, but I mean, if, for instance, it was Margaret Thatcher, the woman people love to hate. It was Margaret Thatcher who introduced clean needle exchange when the AIDS crisis hit, because she was a scientist, she was trained as a chemist, and she recognised that, on the basis of the scientific evidence, on the basis of the scientific evidence, it was important that people who were intravenous drug users had access to clean equipment. And so very much against the instincts of her cabinet, she forced that through. So there's been, I know people hate to hear this, but it's just the truth. The Conservative Party, they've all been terrible. They've all been terrible about drugs policy reform, but the Labour Party has been the worst of the lot. And we have more hope now with Boris Johnson than we've ever had before. I think a couple of years, quite realistically.
I mean, what kind of market do you think will take place? Do you think it would be community-based kind of social clubs, or do you think it will be very much dispensary or like Uruguay with a mixture of both?
I think it will probably be more like, I think it will be more like the American models, like the Colorado, but I think it will be more strict than that. I think that there'll probably be no advertising. There'll probably be limitations on packaging. If they try and implement limits on THC, it'll be a fool's errand, because all they'll do is kick the high THC products back into the black market. But I think they will try to be very tight and restrictive about it to begin with. Probably quite similar to Canada. And I mean, although people are knocking what's happening in Canada, because still half the market is the black market, which is true. But I mean, on the other hand, that does also say that half the market is the legal market as well. So I mean, that's a very good thing, And I mean, it's a very good thing that people can't be sent to jail or turned into a criminal simply for consuming a flower, which is an obscenity. So I mean, it's a very good thing.
I think I read recently there's it's roughly 23% of consumers in Canada still buy from illegal sources, even if they're buying from legal sources. And one of the reasons they gave was that it's much more accessible and much more a relaxing endeavour to get from somebody that's nearby, instead of going miles to another shop or something like that, regionally. And it's one of the things that I think they hadn't pre-established these outlets that would need to sell it in the first place. And do you think the UK, do you think that could be the same stepping stone that they could miss, that they'll have all this product but no place to sell it, no place to distribute it?
Well, I think it's likely to. I think one of the reasons that's arisen in Canada is because it's a bit like the States. Then you have all these provinces that have their own legislation. Yeah. And so some districts, I can't remember what they call them now, but some districts have decided not to implement dispensaries, whereas others have, which is why, as you say, in some instances you have to go an awful long way to come to a government-approved store. But we don't have that structure in the UK, do we? You know, if it's something made legal or if the regulations are introduced, they apply throughout the country. So no, I don't think it will. As I say, I think it probably will be quite strict to begin with. But that's no bad thing, you know. It's the most important thing. The most important thing about it is not so much availability, because frankly, if you want to get hold of cannabis, you can get hold of it anyway. The most important thing is the gangsters. You know, that's the critical thing. The criminal gangs who, I know, you know, many of us, I mean, but many people feel that the person they deal with is a mate. Yeah. And certainly in the past, sorry, it's my phone, I'll just ignore it. Certainly in the past, you know, when I've dealt with dealers, they've been people I've known, friends, you know. Yeah. But it remains the fact that behind those people, the vast majority of the market is controlled by gangsters. Yeah. And the money they make out of the cannabis market goes on to fund, you know, real crime. Yeah. And you know, the modern slavery, Vietnamese kids locked up in grow houses. You know, this is the real evil connected with cannabis. That's what we need to be stamping out.
Yeah. Actually, I think I read an article in The Guardian recently that commented on the exact thing of you're dealing with human trafficking, which is strongly linked to the illegal cannabis industry, which in America and Canada is no longer present because the industry has changed, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, the other thing when it comes to the recreational cannabis is that the cannabis social clubs generally, at the moment, there are acceptable, I think, was it 75, 80 registered cannabis social clubs in the UK, which, to be fair, in the past 5 years, I've only became aware of, and this is somebody that I've used cannabis, obviously, for 15 years strong, completely unaware of it. So it's a counterculture that's, I don't know if it's purposely hidden, obviously, but it's also, for the people that are running these institutions, they're not wanting to market themselves in a way that would cause too much negative attention, you know. So in what way do you think recreational cannabis clubs can benefit without them being something that will rock the boat too much and get themselves in prison?
Well, I mean, I quite like the model. I mean, I think one of the issues is that in Spain, where of course they originated, they are used as a cover for dealing. So I think you have to be careful. I mean, on the other hand, you know, like the Teesside Cannabis Club, his name's Michael Spicer, isn't it? I think. I mean, I think the work he's doing and the relationships he's developed with you know, police and crime commissioners and with his local politicians, I'd say my hat off to him. He's doing a fantastic job, absolutely fantastic job. And the Faces, the Steve Melrish, the organisation that he's running down in Weston-super-Mare, he's doing a fantastic job as well. These people are real pioneers, and I hope there will be. I'm sure there will be room for them in the new regulated system when it comes about. I mean, the only anxiety I have is that you know, some of these people I don't know about those two people I've just mentioned, but some of these people will have cannabis convictions. And that could rule them out of being part of a new legal system. I very much hope it doesn't. As we've seen in the States, on the contrary, what many states are doing is expunging, wiping out any past cannabis convictions now that it's legal. And I mean, that's clearly that would be the moral approach to it.
Yeah. One of the things in particular when it comes to recreational cannabis, it feels like cannabis social clubs give more of a community element, which is something obviously going to a dispensary or going to a government-backed company or whatever, it wouldn't give any of that sensation at all, you know. And it would be it seems like a negative, it would seem, if the recreational cannabis was to come into play and these kind of cannabis social clubs were to be clamped down on in any way, shape or form, you know. It just seems like that would kind of be counterproductive to what legalising cannabis would kind of hope to achieve?
Well, I think, I hear that and I understand that, and I don't disagree with you at all. But I think one of the difficulties from a policymaker's point of view, from a political leader's point of view, is that the way of justifying this to non-cannabis consumers, which remember are still the majority, is that this is going to make it safer, and is going to eliminate organised crime. And so anything that is at the edges that's seen as a bit informal, such as cannabis social clubs, may be seen as risky. So that would be my caution about it. I very much. It's a bit like the difference between going and buying your tomatoes at Sainsbury's or buying them at an organic farm shop. And they're still tomatoes. But it may be that to begin with, we'll only be able to buy them at Sainsbury's.
Do you think it would be the same thing? It'll be 6 plants available for home cultivation, that kind of thing as well, or do you think the UK might apply? I think is it Spain that there are 4 plants? I think there's somewhere that's legalised that you can grow yourself, but it's only 4. I think Uruguay's 6. I think
in the States there's various places you can grow. I mean, in Spain the law is very uncertain in Spain. I mean, they keep on closing down the cannabis social clubs in Spain. In Italy, there was some ruling by some judge in Italy that said you can grow cannabis on your own balcony or your own veranda as long as nobody else can see it.
Just get in the shade kind of thing.
I mean, my view is increasingly that certainly the economic choice and also the ethical choice is to grow your own.
I feel the tents have certainly caused a bit of a revolution in the past 20 years when it comes to independent cultivation and stuff like that. Would you be a proponent for if, when the government eventually puts it through, recreational cannabis, you can grow your own? Would you be up for the the teams that maybe go around to check everybody's grow? Because that's one of the threats that they also say is that if somebody's growing themselves, it could be unsafe, it could be these dangerous circumstances that could cause fires. Do you think that would be too much of a big brother step if the government was to put out teams like that?
Yes, I do really. I think it would be unrealistic. I mean, I think it does need to be limited. I mean, we did some work on this a few years ago. I'm not sure if limiting it by the number of plants is necessarily the best way. You limit it by the area, the growing area, or even by the wattage of your light. Although that could be different if you're using LED as opposed to HPS. But as long as you're not, obviously, if you were setting up a 20 plant or a 40 or 50 plant grow in one of these giant tents, then yes, that could be a significant fire hazard. But no, as long as you're only growing, as we know at the moment, the lower limit in terms of sentencing is 9 plants. Providing you're not growing more than 9 plants, then it will be seen as personal use. But 9 plants is I mean, if you're planning to make oil, then I suppose 9 plants isn't that much. But I mean, you can easily get 4 ounces off 1 plant. And so why would anybody need to grow 9?
Yeah, I mean, I think, was it not, I don't know if it was Dorset police constable or maybe Derbyshire had said that they were no longer going to persecute or even look for people that are growing anything.
There's 6 police forces who've said that. Dorset, Surrey, Avon and Somerset, Durham. I can't remember the others off the top of my head, but there's either 5 or 6 police forces that have publicly announced they're not interested in personal consumption or cultivation.
See, that's a huge step forward. Even a few years ago, you never would have got that number of people. You wouldn't even have got one police establishment. No. You wouldn't. That's a huge step forward, which is more, I don't know if that's industry-based or social-based. I mean, are they seeing that what they're pursuing is fruitless? It's a fruitless endeavour for people that are being classed as criminal. But
exactly. And I mean, austerity, reduction in police budgets has forced them to prioritise. And I mean, clearly, it's more important that you deal with, with thugs in the streets than you deal with people smoking a little bit of weed at home. I mean, it's self-evident. And it's a very good thing. It's a very good thing. But who was it who said it the other day? I can't remember who was quoted saying it the other day, but there's now a lot of people. I mean, I'm 62, and there's a lot of people 20 years older than me,
Yeah.
all right, who've been smoking cannabis. I mean, I've been smoking cannabis. I worked it out the other day for 48 years.
Yeah. Yeah, you've
All
got me
right?
beat.
And there's people who've been smoking it for 20 years longer than me,
Yeah.
and they know it's harmless.
Yeah.
So it's as harmless as anything else. Sure, it can do some people some harm in very limited circumstances, but the arguments as well as I do. So can drinking coffee, so can cycling, so can
Actually, in my I've wrote a book.
doing that.
I've wrote a book called A Case for Cannabis, and I actually included that one of the sections, the recreational use of cannabis in comparison, damage-wise, to caffeinated energy drinks in particular, alcohol as well. And I mean, alcohol you're dealing with is 6 deaths every minute. It's 5% of all diseases globally. 5% of all deaths globally are alcohol related. Energy drinks as well, they've caused numerous deaths. However, never been directly linked. But the implication is strong. You've got kids that have been drunk 3 or 4 tins of energy drinks, went out to do PE, and then had cardiac arrest. So these are things that aren't present with cannabis, and yet that's I think what a lot of people's frustration lies in. That you've got these products in which you can buy readily, and yet cannabis is there's still this debate.
It's also because we have we're particular. We are unique in the world, in Britain and Ireland, I should say. We're having this obsession with cannabis causing mental illness. That belief, because that's all it is. It's a belief. It's like a religious belief among some people. That belief doesn't exist anywhere else. You don't find, you know yourself. If you look online, you don't find endless discussion. Well, apart from there's 1 or 2 exceptions. There's this idiot Alex Berenson. But generally speaking, you don't get people making this argument in other countries. It's not a valid argument. I mean, yes, it's a psychoactive substance, so clearly it can affect your mental health.
Yeah.
And if you're a 14-year-old kid who's sitting down playing computer games, hitting your bong all day long, again and again and again and again, it's not surprising that it's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, it'd be the same if you were sitting down there eating Mars bars and drinking Coke. That wouldn't be a healthy thing to do either. It needs a bit of common sense. And the trouble is, we have our homegrown. It wasn't a deliberate use of the term, but we have our homegrown industry of psychiatrists researching the links between cannabis and psychosis. Every year. In February or March, the Institute of Psychiatry, with the team of Robin Murray and Marta DeForti, released their latest study on links between cannabis and psychosis. It gets massive coverage in the press. They missed out this year, of course, though, because the coronavirus thing had just started. They did release the study, but it sort of fell under the radar a bit. But even they, I know them both. I sat next to Robin Murray at a conference once for 2 days solid. And most people would think he was he and I would be sort of deadly enemies, as it were. But he's not. He's a very nice chap. He's very reasonable. When you talk to him in person, he's much more rational and much more balanced than his views are represented in the press. I'm not so sure about Marta DeForti. She really does worry me. She's a bit obsessive. But Robin Murray has said on the record, he said, you've got to remember, he says, yes, we do show there are all these risks attached to it and everything. But the latest research, this is the latest thing I used, the latest research from the University of York showed that the risk of a diagnosis of psychosis being associated with cannabis consumption was about 1 in 20,000. Now, the risk of being struck by lightning in your lifetime is 1 in 3,000.
Provide some context. Yeah. Well, it's funny that actually mental illness in particular relating to cannabis, because I found that the only actual narcotics, which I'm using cannabis in the context of narcotics, that causes any legitimate evidence of psychosis is amphetamines, cocaine. And these are obviously detrimental. These should be obviously remain illegal kind of thing. But one of the things I found interesting when researching the book was that you've got a huge number of people that have post-traumatic stress and a huge number of people that actually have schizophrenia who use cannabis readily. and to treat these conditions.
PTSD, I think, is one of the most exciting possibilities for cannabis as medicine. The sort of theory behind it all makes sense, because I mean, memory is one of the things that the endocannabinoid system directly impacts, and PTSD are essentially traumatic memories which people are unable to forget, or they're unable to process them and allow them to sort of fade into the past in the way that we do with most things.
Yeah.
And you can understand that if you've been through, if you've been raped, or if you've been in combat, and you've been through, fortunately, touch wood, I don't have any horrendous experience like that in my life. But if you've been through that sort of thing, it can imprint itself on your memory so powerfully that the normal healthy process we have of processing it and then leaving it in the past doesn't work. And we shows quite clearly that cannabis can help you forget. We know that it does do bad things. It does. If you're high, what was I saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We know directly. But I mean, obviously, the key to this is being able to manage those effects in a consistent and reproducible way. So that if you give somebody cannabis or that contains X percentage of THC, X percentage of CBD, and maybe other cannabinoids as well, and maybe terpenes and flavonoids. If you give the people the appropriate mix of these things, then it will have the effect you desire. We're just nowhere near that at the moment. There are in other countries. I mean, Charlotte Caldwell gave me a fascinating insight into the woman who was dealing with Billy Caldwell in Canada, when she took a complete history of him and of his epilepsy, and came up with and actually prescribed a specific ratio of CBD and THC and specific terpenes, based on her diagnosis of exactly what Billy needed.
That seems very advanced knowledge in comparison to what we're dealing with over here.
Exactly, because it's a different world. Yeah. But I mean, you've got to remember the doctors have been, going back to the point I made about the Labour Party earlier. Many people don't know it was in 2001 when David Blunkett was Home Secretary that the Labour Party made it a criminal offence for doctors to prescribe cannabis.
But I was completely unaware of that. That sounds ridiculous.
Doctors have what are called prescribing rights. And this means the doctor is entitled, as of law, to prescribe anything he wants, that if he believes it's going to do your health benefit. But the Labour Party specifically introduced a law to prevent doctors prescribing cannabis. It also prevents them prescribing LSD, mescaline, and a couple of DMT, I think, and a couple of other things. But there's about 5 or 6 drugs which doctors have been specifically which criminalises doctors if they prescribe it. One of which, of course, is the oldest medicine known to man. I mean, so there you have the Labour Party's hand in. I'm not a Labour Party supporter, as you will have gathered. There you have the Labour Party's hand in drugs policy.
That seems quite ironic, considering the Hippocratic Oath. If you consider,
exactly. So you do. Although I mean, the medical profession is very, very conservative, small c, but you have to have some sympathy for them because they've been living in this position where they've been told no. I mean, we some years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, there were some GPs who were interested, and we talked to some of them. We had members who had a GP who was supportive. I had 2 or 3 instances of GPs getting in touch with the Home Office and saying, "What would I have to do to be able to prescribe my client with cannabis? He or she has been using it, and I believe him that it is doing him good." And they were basically warned, "You will be arrested if you take this any further." So doctors have been living under a cloud of intimidation about cannabis for many years.
Yeah, that certainly goes unheard of in the media. You never hear that kind of thing. But But yeah, I was going to actually say cannabinoid-based research at the moment as well. I mean, we're still dealing with an unknown situation with the level of cannabinoids that are present in cannabis. We're still dealing with. Is there still a huge void of medical potential that lies untapped on when it comes to cannabis?
Oh yes, I mean, the only things that have any significant effort put into them now are THC and CBD, aren't they? And I mean, when people look at THC, they're generally trying to find out what harm it does. And when it's only when people look at CBD that they are accepting that it's generally beneficial. But I mean, that is changing, and it's going to start changing much more rapidly now. And I think research is now easier to do into cannabis than it was before. It's still not easy. I mean, until a month ago, I had a number of clients who I was advising on obtaining licenses in the UK and in Ireland for cannabis research and medicine. And the process you have to go through in both countries is incredibly complicated, incredibly expensive. And that explains why we don't have any domestic production yet. Everything has to be imported. But it's the same thing, there's a lot of fear about it still, and no doubt it will improve as time goes on. So
what is Clear? What's your intentions, your goals?
Well, Clear was formed in 1999, and it was then called the Legalized Cannabis Alliance, and we rebranded as Clear Cannabis Law Reform in 2011, shortly after I became a leader. There was a radical overhaul in the way we did everything then. I made the proposal, put it to the members, and they voted to approve it. A lot of the older members didn't like it, but nevertheless, we won. The thing was passed by 2/3 majority. We rebranded. And our principal objective has always been to end the prohibition of cannabis, most urgently for medicine. And that has been achieved. Wasn't Clear that did it. It wasn't any single individual or group who did it. It was the product of a lot of people working together over many years. And what we'd now like to see is we'd like to see cannabis available on a GP's prescription, and we'd like to see a regulated system for adult use and consumption. And as part of the medical thing, we'd like to see domestic production. And I think that those would be our three key things now. So GPs prescribing, domestic production of cannabis for both medical and recreational use, and regulated access for adults.
How would Clear see the recreational market in the UK? What would you propose as a regulator?
We propose a system of licensed outlets. They'd be limited in number. I think the situation you have in some places in the States and Canada, where you have more, famously there are more cannabis dispensaries than there are Starbucks.
Really?
I think that's just stupid, And I mean, although I'm a drinker, I drink the demon alcohol as well as consume cannabis. But I think it's ridiculous the way that you can go and buy alcohol in virtually every shop on the high street now. I think it's just gone way too far. I think alcohol is an extremely dangerous substance. I think it should be more strictly regulated. And I see no problem at all with limiting the number of retailers you can have. They would all have to provide harm reduction information. They'd all have to, labeling is crucial. Labeling is probably the most crucial thing of all, because everything else flows from that. If you have a label on your bag of buds saying, this is the THC content, this is the CBD content, and preferably going into even more detail than that. I'm sure that will take a time to evolve, but about other cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids, that's the most crucial thing of all, because then people know what they're buying.
Things like third-party lab tests and stuff like that.
Exactly, yes, for everything.
Yeah. No. Well, that's essentially what I've got here, Peter. You got anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I think we've had a pretty comprehensive chat, really. We've covered most of it.
So thanks very much for chatting with me, Peter. I've really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Very nice to meet you. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Take care.
Okay. Cheers, Con. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks to Peter for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoy the content. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any Cannamantv updates. I'll see you next time.